growing up in this country, children learn that to be patriotic, they must quote unquote support the troops. So I guess my next question, leading right into what you're probably about to talk about, is the true nature of the U.S. military's presence throughout the planet. In your latest book, The Terrorism Trap, September 11th and Beyond, you point out that the United States military apparatus consists of over 500,000 troops who are stationed on some 400 bases in at least 35 countries.
Mm-hmm.
As well, you note that since World War II, the U.S. government has doled out more than $240 billion in direct military aid to more than 80 countries. And this buildup is justified to us, the American people, as necessary to safeguard us from terrorism, as well to protect the military's host countries from being attacked. So my question is, who are the beneficiaries of this massive U.S. military presence throughout the world?
Well, it is mostly a military presence to prevent social change in various countries. It's to make sure that in country after country in Latin America, Asia, and Africa, that the land, the labor, the natural resources, and the markets will be open completely to international corporate investors on terms that are completely favorable to the international corporate investors. And any country or any leader, whether it be Torrijos in Panama, or Noriega in Panama, or Saddam Hussein in Iraq, or Milosevic in Yugoslavia, or Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, any leader who tries an alternative path, who wants to take some other variant or independent path of self-development for his own people, that leader will be targeted and will be demonized and will be called a ruthless scoundrel. By the way, one of those leaders I mentioned is a ruthless scoundrel, and that's Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was CIA. He was put in Iraq to stop the Iraqi revolution, and he murdered the Kurdish Democratic Party, destroyed it. He murdered communists and progressives, and he even slaughtered the whole left wing of his own Ba'athist party. And so he was the State Department and the White House's sweetheart. He was fine until he started doing economic nationalism and looking for a better deal on oil prices, and then moving against Kuwait because of their slant drilling into his oil fields over the border, under the border. So that's when he suddenly was demonized as worse than Hitler, and that's when the U.S. began its decade-long war of attrition and horror against the Iraqi people. They've suffered because of Saddam Hussein. So let's see, I'm trying to get back to what the original question was that you posed. Why the U.S. is pursuing this kind of world empire? Why does it need this global military apparatus? It is the leading country when it comes to making the world safe for the Fortune 500 and corporate capitalism. Those things, that's not what they tell the American people. They tell the American people, we got to protect you from communism, we got to protect you from this, that, and the other thing. And now the terrorist attacks of September 11 were a golden opportunity. I mean, you and I look at that September 11 and see a horrible incident. They look at it and see a golden opportunity. I mean, it was just wonderful how it served their interest to escalate the military budget, roll back our civil liberties, give the internal security agencies a freer and freer hand to intrude and control. And all those powers given under the guise of fighting terrorism aren't fighting terrorism. All those powers are going to be used, for instance, this power of the FBI under the USA Patriot Act. The FBI now has the power to check any librarian in a library and see who is taking out what books where. That's going to be used against political dissenters. They're not doing a damn thing about terrorism. They still can't stop guns and explosives from getting through the airport checks. I don't know if you saw today's paper or yesterday's, which showed that, at least as reported in the San Francisco Chronicle, some 15 guns, or 15% of the weapons they used, dummy weapons, got through undetected, and explosives got through undetected. I mean, the actual security measures, the security around our nuclear power plants is almost non-existent. We've had private planes have flown back and forth over the power plants, and nobody scrambled to come up and challenge them or call them down or anything. So then they're doing very little for real homeland security. They're doing really very little in hunting down the cells of perpetrators. Most of those arrests and such have been done by Interpol or European or Middle East police. No, what Bush has been interested in doing is waging a war in Afghanistan, which gives him hegemony over Afghanistan, allows him to station U.S. troops in various other surrounding countries, get their oil pipeline through, cut back on human services under the guise that this money is now needed for the war against terrorism, keep the country in a siege psychology. You heard what he said when it happened. He said, this is the first war of the 21st century. He announced it. He didn't say, let's hope this is the last war, or we mustn't have any war in the 21st century. He said, this is the first war. Yippee, with lots more to come. And he saw that when you send troops out and there's a crisis and there's a danger, then the people start treating the president the way they treat God. They start huddling around him and looking to him for leadership, guidance, and salvation. And he's fully aware of that. And his on September 10, his ratings were at a paltry 41% or so, or less than that. And on September 12, his ratings were 75, 80, 90%. I think they've slumped since then back down to the high 60s or whatever. It depends on which poll you look at. But anyway.
Why do you think it is that people rush around the president, especially this president, who some say has no legitimate claim to the office he holds?
Well, just as I said, in a crisis, they all huddle around the leader and look to him for salvation. That's one. Two, when the military is committed and there's a war, they rally around the president. The military commitment stirs up their patriotism, and they're waving flags. They got flags on their cars, they got flags in their windows, and they got flags like this is going to solve something. Well, that's fine. It's our flag, too. It's the American flag. Big deal. It doesn't mean that it's solving anything, and it's really answering to the issues of the day. He can get you to wave your flag and run around and salute and pledge allegiance under guard or not under guard, whoever. But that isn't going to protect us against terrorism, and that isn't going for future terrorist attacks, and that isn't going to solve the immense problems of this country, nor does it solve the problems which the U.S. national security state has been creating around the world.
In late May, FBI agent Colleen Rowley came forward with testimony that the FBI, in fact, might have missed warnings about some of the alleged 9/11 hijackers. And this news seems to have fueled some speculation that the Bush administration, in conjunction or in operation with other elements of the national security state, were behind these attacks. Do you think there's any credibility to this notion that the September 11th attacks are akin to what some have said is Hitler's burning of the Reichstag?
No, the Reichstag was it was so obviously he burned it and he set it up and that. No, they weren't behind the attacks in the sense that they didn't script these attacks and they didn't pay for and plan them. The truth is they had been funding the people who had been doing it. They gave Osama bin Laden license, isn't that right? They let him leave the country. He'd come in. He had been funded by the CIA years ago. The CIA had contacts with Al-Qaeda. They knew something was up, let's put it this way. They did know that something was going to happen. That, my friend, is not a speculation. That's public record. They've said it. They've come out and admitted as much. Condoleezza Rice, you heard what she said about a month ago. She said, we knew that some planes would be hijacked, but we thought it would be a hostage situation. Now, I find that very interesting. We knew there's going to be hijacking planes, and they were just sitting there. They even had a good idea who the people were. I mean, they had information that there was this group of young men from the Middle East all arriving around the same time, looking for visas, and and enrolling for flying lessons, and showing no interest in how to take off or land. Just wanted to learn how to fly. Excuse me, hello? They knew, and they didn't mind. And the reason they don't mind is because they know every time there's a terrorist attack, there's a real good terrorist attack that can hit on U.S. soil, that would put the country right behind the White House, put them in step, and they could push their agenda. And that's exactly what they did. And on September 12th, the Wall Street Journal, as I pointed out in the terrorism trap, Wall Street Journal instructed George Bush, said, this is a good time for you to be able to push through your tax cut for the very rich, roll back environmental controls, open up the Arctic for drilling for oil, and drastically increase military spending. The American taxpayer now ponies up $400 billion a year. I mean, that's more than all the other industrial countries put together spend on military spending. The second closest country is Russia with $51 billion. What is all that for? The Pentagon now admits that there's $1.2 trillion over the last 20 years that they cannot account for. Now, you don't misplace $1.2 trillion. Somebody's getting this money. Somebody's pocketing it, and it's getting siphoned off. So this is the kind of kleptocracy we have here. This kind of theft and corruption that's been going on really big time.
We're speaking with Michael Parenti, noted author. His latest book is entitled The Terrorism Trap. It's available through City Lights Books. In the days after September 11th, a remarkable thing happened. All television advertising stopped for a day, and the networks were sharing footage with each other, which was an unprecedented move in a world of profit-driven news reporting. This was pointed to, as that good old American spirit of kinship and sharing. I'm curious what your thoughts were as you watched the reporting on September 11th and the reporting that has happened since in the mainstream corporate press.
As I mentioned in the terrorism trap, I was impressed by the fact that the news media not only echoed the officialdom line, especially if it's conservative in power, and not only faithfully echoed like a lapdog the national security state line. We've always known that that's what they do. But the news media actually went into business for itself. It actually cleared the ground on September 12th before any politician dare utter it. The news media were busy making clearing the road, creating a climate of opinion that enabled them to do the things they did. I mean, I remember, I would say it was actually on September 11 itself, by noontime of that day, I heard Tom Brokaw saying, "This is war. We are at war." And then another announcer on NBC saying, "Americans have taken their freedoms for granted, but they may have to give up some of those freedoms for security reasons." So they were already saying things which no politician uttered until a good week later, and they were repeating these things again and again. We have to go to war. We're going to have to strike. Brokaw even said, when are we going to really strike and hit them in real force and really get an army moving against these terrorists? And so the media is not just a lapdog that faithfully echoes the official line. It actually, like any good instrument of propaganda, it actually goes out and clears the way and helps generate a certain climate of labeling and imagery and whatever.
I want to get back a little bit more on the subject of patriotism. We mentioned a little bit earlier about the American flag, and I just was struck by the amount of symbols that we have here in this country to express our civic pride. We have, for example, fireworks on the 4th of July, Rockwell's famous portrait of Rosie the Riveter, Uncle Sam, and as you mentioned, the American flag. I'm struck, though, how many of our symbols that we have of our patriotism are linked with military conquest, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this topic.
Yes, a lot of patriotic symbols are war memorials, war symbols of that sort, statues of servicemen serving their country. I mean, are you really serving your country when you're killing villagers in Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos and Philippines and Afghanistan? Or are you really serving your country? Is this serving your country? Patriotism is I already did at the beginning, I think, made that distinction between that brand of patriotism which defines itself in terms of military prowess and violence and war, and that brand of patriotism that defines itself and its strength in terms of the just and good life, which doesn't mean you have to be completely disarmed and indifferent to other people. But if the U.S. had been pursuing policies that were beneficial for the people of our own country, first of all, we wouldn't have a country where the military has $1 trillion they just misplaced and never even got around to spending on the things they were supposed to spend it, and at the same time have schools where the roofs are leaking and the water's coming through, and communities that don't have enough money for essential services, for shelters for the homeless, for daycares for working women. I mean, you can go on. What we have is this immense private wealth and military glut and public poverty, so that the empire devours the resources of the republic in order that patricians may pursue their far-off plunder, in order that it can maintain this control. But that kind of control has really led other people to hate us. When the U.S. goes in and the CIA goes in and destroys democratic and popular movements in Turkey and Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan and Egypt and Yemen and Syria, I mean, reformist movements in Lebanon, and supports Israel in their attack on the West Bank and Palestinian community, that leads only to hatred of America and Americans. And even there, I think Osama bin Laden and others like him are wrong. You shouldn't hate America and Americans. America is an entity of 280 million people, widely diverse people. It's U.S. leaders who have been pursuing these kind of policies in our name, using our tax money to go off and make the world safe for the Fortune 500. Make sure that no reform movements come up, that no strong indigenous organizations and institutions develop which can say, hey, wait a minute, we don't want General Motors in here. We want to use this land and these resources for ourselves, for our own people, And it wouldn't hurt us. It would add to our prosperity if the rest of the world were prosperous too. They'd buy more from us. They'd have better things to sell to us. But it would cut drastically into the profits of those big corporations that depend on getting these natural resources for a song and using the cheap labor of these countries. That doesn't help the American economy, by the way. When you close factories in Ohio to go move to China or in Indonesia, where you can pay people 15 cents an hour instead of $15 an hour, that's not helping the American people. And they can make things so much cheaper over there, but that doesn't really lead to a cheaper commodity here. When Nike closed all its stateside factories and moved to Indonesia, where they were paying people 12 cents, children, young girls, 14-year-old girls, 12 cents an hour for Nike shoes. They didn't, and to make a pair of shoes with all the outsourcing and shipping all the material all the way over there, the labor was so cheap, it cost them about $7 for a pair of shoes. They didn't come back and sell it to us any cheaper. They're still selling those shoes for $150, $200, $90 a pair, whatever. They don't go and do all that to give you a better buy. They do all that to widen their margin of profit. So the American people are paying the cost of this empire in taxes, in the loss of jobs, in the incredible damage to their environment, the environment around the globe, because it's all one environment, and even the environment at home. The biggest single polluter of our environment at home is the U.S. military, which, by the way, is under no pollution restrictions or controls. Military nuclear plants are under no restrictions and controls the way civilian nuclear plants are, as inadequate as those restrictions are. So this is where, and these are the hidden costs of this empire, which Americans really should be looking at. Just to wave the flag doesn't make you a patriot. You know what Jesus said in the Bible? He said, "Not everyone who saith, Lord, Lord, shall enter unto the kingdom of heaven." And I say here too, not everyone who starts chanting USA, USA is really a great patriot.
So on June 26th, in what President Bush termed a ridiculous decision, a federal appeals court in San Francisco ruled 2-1 that the phrase "under God" in the Pledge of Allegiance is unconstitutional. I wanted to get you to comment on a June 28th opinion piece entitled "Trivializing a Big Issue: Exactly Who's Victimized by the Existence of the Words Under God in the Pledge of Allegiance." This was written by the editors of the daily Santa Cruz Sentinel, and in the opinion piece they asked the following: "In a world in which innocent people are murdered, in which people lose their life's savings because of lying and cheating by financial leaders, in which schools are failing, who really wants to worry about 2 words in the Pledge of Allegiance? We can't imagine that any single person has been prevented from pursuing his or her freedom of expression in any way because of those 2 words in the Pledge of Allegiance. What next? Recalling all coins and dollar bills because of the 'In God We Trust' line?" Michael Parenti, what is your reaction to this opinion piece?
Well, in a way, there's a partial truth in the sense that it's not really such a big issue, given all the emotional attention that's being given to that issue. But the truth of the matter is, I was raised on the Pledge of Allegiance. We said, "One nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all." I don't even know if getting kids to chant the Pledge of Allegiance like little parrots, if that really is the training for patriotism. There really should be a separation of church and state. That was intended by the founding fathers. They did not believe in any establishment of a religion. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law relating to establishment of religion. The whole issue is really just blown out of proportion to that degree. On the other hand, I don't believe in the glorification of religion. It's religious zealots who bombed the World Trade Center, who destroyed the World Trade Center and killed the people in those airplanes. Religions, the history of religions has been a horrible history. Most people don't even know that history. The history of Christianity and the history of Islam and the history of Hinduism and even the history of Buddhism, which is supposedly the one peaceful religion. There are Buddhist armies fighting each other in Tibet for centuries. How do you think the Dalai Lama got all that wealth and all that land? It wasn't just sitting there with his prayer beads. And today you've got Buddhists fighting Christians from Nigeria to Sri Lanka. So the history of religions has been a history of murder and slaughter and mayhem and hatred and intolerance and vehemence. And the history of Christianity is just horrendous and horrible. We know little bits of it, but you've got to study it in more detail. It's not just the Inquisition and all. It just went on and on from the very beginning, from the very first centuries, the fights of different Christians against each other, killing each other and whatever, the Manichaeans and this heresy and that heresy. So we can't separate religion from the things that are done in its name. And what's done in religion's name is some very beautiful, charitable, self-sacrificing things, helpful things, human, caring things, just things. And what's also done in religion's name is some brutal, horrible, murderous things, many. So this eagerness to marry religion with patriotism is just part of what we've been talking about. That particular brand of patriotism, that chanting, mindless, flag-waving patriotism, which goes out and says, let's kill them, and that particular brand of religion, which says, Lord, 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 under God, intolerant, holier than thou, both those things I just have no care for and no feel for at all.
Finally, what advice would you recommend for leftist activists in dealing with that very attitude? We often hear we're often accused of being terrorists or traitors or told to move to Canada or some other such nonsense. But how do you deal with that when you get accused of those types of things?
Well, when people say to me, well, if you don't like this country, why don't you leave? I say, well, this is my country. Don't tell me to leave. The American way is to help change and improve. If we had this attitude of never complain and accept everything they come down on us with, we wouldn't have any Social Security, we wouldn't have any public education, we wouldn't have any kind of environmental controls, as inadequate as they are. We wouldn't have anything. We'd all be working like in 1900 for 15 cents an hour. I mean, in 1900, the U.S. was a third world country a half a century before the term was invented. Mass poverty, unemployment, typhoid and tuberculosis epidemics, the diseases of the poor, child labor, no labor unions to speak of really, no public education, no public health to really speak of, no job security, nothing. It was a century of struggle. Those are the real patriots, the people who don't just love their country as a mindless abstract, but who love and care for the people in that country and want to see them treated justly. And treated justly means that we don't have to give the largest portion of our income in taxes so that the rich can keep siphoning off this money from the public treasure, and that we can use this money for the well-being of the people. That's a real patriotism.
All right, we've been speaking with Michael Parenti,